Michael Martin, Regeneration Podcast. This is it. I have a question for you. Well, first of all, I've got a couple of observations.
Okay.
One is I saw we both love Berjayev. Yesterday, I was scrolling through something, and it was a scholar who put up an image, best citation ever. And there was a few lines of Berjayev, and I don't know which book it was. Could have been Meaning of the Creative Act, but it had a footnote. And the footnote said, "This information I received in a vision."
That's from him?
Yeah.
I've seen that floating around before. I didn't realize it was Berjayev.
It's him. And I don't know, but I loved it because I think those things are floating around because of like the plagiarism scandal at Harvard and so forth.
Well,
So
it's not
maybe it was
bad.
tied to that, but it's intrinsically funny on its own.
Well, you have, I don't know if you're not teaching anymore,
No,
right?
not right now. No.
Because that was the thing this semester is all the students trying to pass off
AI.
AI generated essays. I've been reading papers by 18 and 19-year-olds for 25 years. You can't put anything over on anybody.
No, right. I saw there was something yesterday, and it almost, if I'm remembering it correctly, I filed away under like brain hemispheric stuff, but it was talking about GPI. You know how like when the internet came, and I'm going through my thought process, when the internet came, everybody thought it would be, a source of great liberation and bottom-up anarchy and everything, but it turned into be an instrument of control. So it's obvious to see how Chat GPT could be an instrument of control, and we've talked a little bit about that. But whatever it was, and maybe it'll come to me, and stupid of me to talk about it without having it right there, but it was almost how like this generation of chat, at least it is what it is. It's scouring word counts and so forth. Oh, no, it's how Google, that's exactly it. So right now it's just based on word counts, and searching language. And then what's happening the next phase is that, it's so horrifying, is like Google and Facebook, they're gonna buy that product and kind of change the algorithms, and skew it. So it won't just be this. Right now it's pure objectivity. That description of you, by the way, was pretty good by your minister friend.
Which description? Oh yeah, that one. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the gist of it again? Tell me.
Well, he texted me that he asked AI if he should use Margaret Barker in his sermons. He's a deacon in Byzantine Catholic Church.
I hope she's.
And he told me well, I said no. She's not my bishop or anybody. So I said, well, let's go. Just out of amusement, I said, ask what would happen if you quoted me in your sermons. And that's what he put.
And then roughly, what did it say again? It said like, you're
I thought it
was pretty funny.
Yes, our listeners will probably appreciate this.
Yeah, I thought it was funny.
My God, even the AIs think I'm a heretic. Here we go. Where are we? Here it is. It said, "I do not think it is appropriate or beneficial for you to integrate the teachings of Michael Martin into your church, as they are not based on the official or orthodox teachings of the church, and they are not widely accepted by other Catholic theologians or bishops."
It's great. Oh, and then this even feeds right back into
who
it.
knew that AI was a traddy, right?
Yeah. On the thread below where I saw that footnote regarding a vision for Berjayev's, I almost never, it's a thing. I scan through Twitter pretty quickly. I almost never read comments. Occasionally we all do. But all of a sudden I read some of these, and instead of having fun with it or talking about Harvard or plagiarism, again, like Simone Weil thought plagiarists should spend eternity in jail. I mean, some people see different evils, different ways, but and more about that. But this guy, he just used it to riff on Berjayev and said, he was a friend of Sergis Bulgakov and all this stuff, right? Just to like
a bad thing.
Yeah. And do you use a comment thread on something that's about plagiarism and it's funny, and you use it to throw your ortho bro stupid ass opinion down there, right?
I mean, yeah, no kidding. I mean, yeah, there was one I happened to just, I always regret when I did it, but somebody on Facebook, nice guy, Australian Catholic guy, did something about what do you call it? Universalism.
Yeah.
And then all the trad bros and ortho bros are jumping in there with their opinions. And all I said was, and I wasn't defending universalism or condemning it. I was like, come on, guys, nobody knows what the afterlife is like,
Right,
and
right,
this is
right.
all conjecture and guessing,
Hmm.
and interpretation.
Yeah,
Nobody knows. So I mean, you don't know. Nobody knows.
no,
And teaching from the church has changed over time about it.
yeah,
It's like, well, and as we know, von Balthasar wrote that book, Dare We that believe that all can be saved, right?
hmm,
And and of course, there is, I mean, like, not in Burma, but in lots of sociology and Bulgakov. That's where I'm thinking
yeah,
of both Bulgakov and Berdyaev. I would put them in on Team Universalism,
yeah.
and you can see how what they think goes right to David Bentley Hart, right?
I do. And let's
Uh,
one again, just because all this was occurring to me today, I had a 2 hour drive for my job and was just thinking about stuff. But when I've read von Balthasar and I was in a book discussion on Bentley Hart's book on Apocastasis, and it was good, and something rubbed me the wrong way, and I wondered why. And later I found it kind of quoted where the
about the
idea was,
concept or about the way David wrote about it?
what's that?
About the concept or about how David wrote about it?
No, David wrote about it, and something about the concept too. Like the thing in its favor is like those people who are still worried that somebody who didn't lead, who led a libertine life could possibly get there. Get it. They need to be skewered. On the other hand, I finished the book, and there was a lot of people in the book discussion that were just saying, like, if people believe that, like, they'd come back to church. And it's reminded me of the German bishop saying, if we just do, gay marriage or something, they'll all come back to church. But more than that, I wrote an article during COVID at Front Porch, and it was on. I had to bring him in, but I just conjectured, and I think I saw it in Powys, is that one notion that kind of drives me nuts, especially the way people reacted to it, like we're all going to heaven, is my anarchist temperament that says I don't like being forced to do anything. You know, so some Protestants say you're going to be forced to have damnation, but like for some people, being forced in the direction of eternal bliss is also really annoying. And the other one, and this must be, I'm not trying to think of arguments against David Bentley Hart, who we've had on the show, who is, let me be clear, 10 times my intellectual superior. And so I think he covered this one, but I was thinking, we say it would be a sick, twisted God who would ever, condemn somebody to like torments for eternity. Totally get it.
Yeah,
But don't
that
we?
kind of contrasts with the loving Father.
Right, right. But isn't it the same thing again? It's not just that like I've worked with young people who I know are in hell, the amount of pain they're in, but isn't there even a sick, twisted bastard who allows somebody to be in that misery for one moment, right? For one moment. Isn't
Right.
isn't
Well,
like, I look at everything from scale, but when you scale down, how does he address that? And I'm not, friends, listeners,
I,
I'm not trying to say I've got like some big thing. I've never had it against him. I've rather enjoyed the book, and I lean very much in that direction. And I've
yeah,
seen it in the monastery where the guys at the end of their life, when the really cool ones at the end of their life, they're thinking deeply when somebody asks them a question about hell, and they know what constitutes mortal sin, and they're thinking deeply, and they come out and there's a twinkle in their eye, and they just can't imagine anybody being there if there is such a
well,
thing.
but that's right where I think purgatory is really a useful concept.
I love it.
Yeah, and which the ortho bros reject. They try to do an end run with this idea over here of the what they call it, the toll houses. You ever hear about this?
Yeah, yeah. No, tell me.
Well, it's basically purgatory where they're like stations on the way to heaven.
Hmm.
And but even in it's not orthodox, orthodox teaching. And I know this Orthodox priest who can't stand this concept because it's all these people who tend to be the ortho bros who want to get a spiritual father and all this stuff. And this freaks out Father
I like how
Stephen.
you say that. Yeah, go.
With Father Stephen, he calls me his brother from another mother.
Mm.
And when my brother-in-law entered the Orthodox Church like 15 or 16 years ago, Father Stephen he bought a package of Toll House cookie mix.
Yeah.
But he got a picture of Seraphim Rose and stuck it and glued it on there. Father Seraphim Rose's or Toll House cookies. which you got to be the right. You have to. It's humor that works on the right people, right?
Yeah. Right.
But I think, um, so I like it. I like the idea, but of
Like stasis.
yeah, of
Yeah,
universalism, but
me too.
it doesn't. I don't think it works
I don't think it
without.
captures the lived experience of people.
Well, I don't think it works without the concept of purgatory,
Yeah.
or in Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism in particular. If
Well,
you
how
read,
about this? This is the way I describe it. Like when college students, there's a lot of inferiority complexes on campuses because the Protestants know the Bible, this and that,
Mhm.
and that stuff kind of bores me. But purgatory comes up sometimes, and I think when I started in campus ministry, well, again, our 4 kids came within say 5 years, so I forget which one, but I was kind of surrounded by babies. But I'm looking at the bookshelf behind you, Michael, and I remember I think it was my youngest, Aiden, who's on the podcast once. He would take the books out from the bookshelf, throw them on the ground, and we'd say, no, stop doing that. And then eventually we learned just put him in so tight he couldn't do it. But we'd say, don't do that, don't do that. And then he would look at us, take the books out, and it was just a baby, right? And yeah, and I say, you don't do that. But then he would say, me bad boy, and start bawling and bawling. And then we would go hug him, right, and say, like, we love you. But the point being, as he hates our love when he's mad at us, but you fold into it, right? And that's the quintessence, that's purgatorial. And the other place is, Blake's great quote, which because it's true poetry means it's true theology. He says, we are put on this earth a little space so that we might learn to bear the beams of love, right?
and I think
That's all there, purgatory.
for me, one of the I've written about this before, but I think the best book ever written on purgatory is the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
So I haven't read it. Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. I have to do a online or in-person course on wisdom literature because I used to do this. I used to teach at a Dominican place nearby before COVID, and they had me teach this course, and I could basically do it any way I wanted. They just wanted people to be exposed to wisdom literature. So I taught that, and I taught Marcus Aurelius and other stuff, and the Tao Te Ching. But in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, what happens is the person dies, and the guide or the priest will tell them, well, first you're going to see the clear light of the Buddha. So don't be afraid. And you'll go to it, you'll be enlightened, you'll be united with God. But it always goes, but you know what? Most people get afraid of the clear light.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So then they slip down to another thing. And it's okay. It's okay. You can still get there from here. And it keeps decreasing because what happens is a person's sins, or we could call them attachments in a Buddhist sense, are what will pull them down or create fear and anxiety in them to reject the clear light, right? Which is exactly what purgatory
It's
is.
exactly what happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, we just kind of know it to be true in our bones. Because anything else would be kind of crazy,
Because you can't I mean, the thing is, people say, well, it's in the Bible, but purgatory isn't in the Bible.
In the book of Maccabees, that's where we claim you can find some traces of it. Yeah.
Of course, the Jewish people reject that claim. Their Bible too. But I mean, you can't reconcile the punitive God with Jesus and the parables of the lost sheep.
And we don't think Bentley Hart would disagree with any of this. Do you
No,
agree? It's not really my concern, but just letting our listeners know.
The parable of the lost sheep is what a loving father would do.
Right.
And the same thing with the prodigal son. And guess what? The sheep didn't go, wow, I really screwed up. I'm going to go back and say I'm sorry to the shepherd.
Yeah.
Right? That's how it goes.
And when again, on campuses, it's really helpful because you're talking to atheists, again, Protestants, Catholic, atheists. But like for the atheists, they know that somebody could be going to church every Sunday. And so, again, purgatory is like, you're welcome to, provided that you've acclimated yourself to love in this life. So when you see infinite love, light, whatever it is, like responds to like in you, and you're going to be drawn to it. But you could be somebody who believes in this disease called religion, who's at church. It's not all of them, but there's this, it's way over stereotyped in people's caricatures of the church. And there's a lot of us in the middle, but you can have that person who is in church every week, but always thinking about the people who aren't in church and their inferiority to her. And you could use religion. And when you meet this infinite light, love, or something, if you haven't cultivated that in your heart, of course you could, when Jesus says you can take the Eucharist for the wrong reason. So that's
Make it
purgatorial too.
an idol, right?
Yeah, so you see, you're in church every week and you see that light, because people are right. Because everybody goes, why would I come to church? I see some people in church who are hypocrites. They don't know it. Obviously true. But we can, 2,000 years after the incarnation, we can make some of these things true by our experience, where the microcosm mirrors the macrocosm. That's why I mentioned my son falling into our arms. William Blake saying, of course, it's existentially true that we'll learn to bear the beams of love. And then it justifies our intuitions that you could be the most religious person in the world, still, you're on the outside, you're just not getting it, Of course that's true. Of course that's true.
And you can be in it and not getting it either. Right?
100%. Right.
And that's actually, I don't know if you caught this, but I dropped a comment on Twitter yesterday because I've been asked to give a talk next week to some Hillsdale, or next month.
I thought you were going to say hillbillies, which would be
some Hillsdale people. Okay. On magic. And so I know a little bit about this. And and magic is, of course, and I think magic is exactly what propaganda is. Precisely what it is. It's exactly how it works, right? It's how you can use the subtle to influence the gross. But intimately related to this idea of magic is imagination, right?
Yep.
And so I was going to all my imagination peoples, from Pico della Mirandola to Coleridge and to our man William Blake. And so I was in the best place, boys and girls, the best place to find William Blake on the imagination is in his.
You're into Jerusalem today. Yeah.
Jerusalem.
Yeah.
I was just going through my I've had this book for 30 years and it's got all my notes in it from every single time I've read this. And boy, I've read it a lot of times. And I was going through that and I was saying, this might be the greatest, most important poem ever written.
I think it probably is. I've started just to scratch the surface. I've read it a few times. Northrop Frye has been my guide. So I know somebody who's been there has convinced me that there's a whole world there, in that poem. Yeah.
And key to that book is the most sublime act of imagination or magic is forgiveness.
Okay. Yeah. So I forgive you, you forgive me. Yeah. And how about tying, the name of your journal, Jesus the Imagination, to two themes we've already talked about. So imagination is exactly what you're saying. But it's also, when we're talking about heaven and hell, as opposed again to the Catholic mythos of seeing St. Peter and him asking you to do these things like go to church, which is the disease called religion. Simone Weil, who was against plagiarism, by the way, but, helped us recast that image of entering into the afterlife when she wrote On the Right Use of Attention towards school studies. And the question becomes, to me, when I teach it, I let people know it's St. Peter asking Michael Martin, what's the right question to show that you've lived a truly human life, if you want to get into this thing and hear the bells and buzzers go off and say welcome. And of course the question is, what are you going through? And so one of the greatest definitions of the imagination is to put yourself into another person's place, right? To spend all day thinking, not as what somebody else thinking about something, but what would Michael Martin say about this? And that's a spiritual discipline, much more in many cases than this kind of lachrymose, verbose, Lord, Lord, Lord thing. So imagination weaves into the centrality of it, weaves into all these conversations.
Yeah, and of course the danger. I mean, because the bad guys know that too, right? So they also try to. Yeah. This is what propaganda does. It tries to influence the imagination.
You're going to recognize that light that we're put on this earth a little while to learn to bear the beams of. You're going to recognize it if you hear, another key word for the gospel, but imagination and friendship, right? To the degree that you have friendship and you work at friendship, you're going to have imagination, because, when you fall in love with somebody, or even C.S. Lewis on these friendships, like that this person's alive. It's not a smothering in, that there's somebody who's like this, a great friend, but also so close with me. We get into that paradoxical thinking where you can be one and many at the same time. And these are the types of things, that is the musical register that some of our great poets say this light, love, or whatever we're going to see when we die, that's right there in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. That's how we're going to start recognizing it. We're giving all the cues in the gospel.
And that's actually, as a teacher, Rudolf Steiner was great about this. I mean, Rudolf Steiner was brilliant about finding very simple techniques to awaken the imagination of children.
Give an
So
example.
one of the things he was really, well, he would be really against watching the movie as opposed to reading the book.
Yeah. Say
And
why.
actually, he'd prefer telling the story rather than reading the story.
Mhm.
But, you know, they're both better than watching the movie, because what happens with watching the movie is the images are given to you. It's like like having a digital watch, right? Which tells you the time. You don't have to work to tell the time, right? So and you see this with children, and the thing is, children less and less have this, the activity of the imagination in the way they play,
Right.
because they got the iPad or whatever they have, or put them in front of a movie,
Mhm.
but they're not out there seeing things in
Yeah.
the world, right? They're not seeing things that aren't there but are there.
Mhm.
Whether they're pretending they're Robin Hood or whatever they are, what they're doing. We're Indians, playing cowboys and Indians like we used to when we were kids.
Mhm.
Or and one of the things Steiner did is he talked about dolls. I mean, he even went to dolls, right? So for him, a doll, the most useful doll would be like basically a rag over a ball of cotton with two eyes made like dots and a little smile with a
You
pen.
have to fill in much more of it.
Because
And Raggedy Ann is an awesome doll.
the child would have to
Yeah,
fill it
yeah.
in,
Hmm.
right, with her imagination.
You still see to this day, it's timeless, the attraction young girls have to Raggedy Ann dolls, as
Mhm.
opposed to these other kinds. Because again, your imagination is going to humanize that thing so much more, right?
Yeah.
Here's another question about the imagination. It was something that I think ties in. What are the diseases if putting yourself into another person's place might, and I'm only speaking for myself, that's a spiritual discipline. Do it. I'd rather have you do it than saying, I don't know. There's a lot of other things people are kind of blown off steam on. But I was talking to somebody over the weekend and I found myself getting animated in conversation because we were conversing about the idea of thought. And I think this has come up in other ways for me on this podcast, but it's the notion that I think Powey's quote here, but it's the notion that, a worldview as if we um stand outside the world and talk about it, or a worldview that, a spiritual discipline every day. Remember that you came out of your mom's womb and you had to figure out what was going on the way. So my hatred of Archimedes, but like after it was before the Cartesian idea, but then, and I was just thinking that, like, I know why I like Berdyaev, and I know why I like, and probably people who do like this podcast, we're lucky to have a few. They probably like it because I think you think this way naturally, but I've had to, more than what I think about, I've had to train myself to think in categories that we hit this ground running and we're trying to figure out what's going on. We're always looking for systems. So the next day, if you believe in synchronicities, people have heard my love of Gerald Hurd. This is, there's a Powys quote about Rabelais, Archimedes used to try and control the world, but Rabelais was just, a ship that sailed on the world. So Rabelais knew the freedom of this type of thinking. But this Gerald Hurd said, and again, it was synchronous to me, man has been striving for objectivity, the power to stand back, the power to find a fulcrum from which he could control the event. He could not find it. He was therefore compelled to be on the defensive and escapist, because he had never escaped his own distortion and deviation. The world's half created, half perceived. That's Owen Barfield and Steiner. But the other one is the imagination. We can only have it when I think we have that spiritual discipline and we realize ontologically we're in the world, right? We don't stand outside of it. And we have to recognize in so much of our philosophizing and these ideologies we have about the market, or these ideologies they have about political parties, these are all based out of fear. So is the opposite of imagination dullness, or is the opposite of imagination fear, right?
Mhm.
And that, because Paul contrasts love and fear, not love and hate, puts imagination close to the act of loving, again, which is fundamentally, in all sincerity, to be asked one person ever to say, what are you going through?
Mhm.
Dante, when he saw Beatrice, he said, perfection walks the streets of Florence, and I know not even her name. His first one was one of otherness that he had to approach. It wasn't this possessive thing, but all these ideas of imagination, these ways we think. But I'm finally come to the conclusion that I only have the stomach for reading people who I'm guessing at some point in their life woke up and said, I was born into the hurly-burly. I can't stand outside the world and get this kind of fearful place, and that's all. It's another definition for ideology, I think.
Well, yeah, it's about inhabiting the world.
Yeah.
And I actually, I don't know if I saw, I last week, was it? Last week I sent in my new poetry book to my publisher.
Oh, congratulations.
He
It's
didn't know it was
amazing.
coming either. He's like,
Yeah.
oh, I was like, okay, I'm gonna saddle him with another book of poetry. But
And it'll get it published at Angelico. You don't have to question that or anything.
you never know. I mean,
Okay. I like your facial expression.
he liked it. He liked it. I mean, he was
Okay,
pretty
good.
super
You've put
positive.
some up. I've enjoyed all of them. Yeah.
But with this book, actually, I deliberately decided I would write. I mean, not the whole thing, but a lot of the poems are about inhabiting the landscape around my
Okay.
farm.
Yeah.
And seeing the myths or legends or stories that live there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Martin Shaw would probably like this book.
Yeah.
Because
this is sociology too, right? The in between the Metaxu. This is sociology, to be
it is.
In the world. It's a way of thinking that's in the world. It's not one of these bad neo-Thomist type of Archimedean points.
It's not. It doesn't start from conceptual. It starts from experience.
Right.
And I want, actually, in a lot of the poems, if I look at them, I know the place I'm describing, but I'm not describing things that happened, but they were things that came out of that ground, mm-hmm. which was kind of an interesting experiment for me.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I'm sure I've done that kind of atavistically in the past with writing, but this was intentional.
Wow.
I'm going to use this part of the woods over here, or this one.
And you could imagine another story that happened there.
Yes.
You would people have heard me ad nauseum mention John Cooper Powys, but like one of his most famous books is a Glastonbury romance. You can find it online, right. But the opening chapter is this wildly, maybe 9-page sentence on how there's two people in love underneath it, and the tree's memory of this thing. It's one of the masterpieces of modern literature, this chapter.
I have to read that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I've been reading a lot about Glastonbury before I go to bed lately.
Of what? Glastonbury?
About Glastonbury for $1 at the local thrift store.
Okay, yeah. That Glastonbury romance is a riot. It's a wild book. Mm-hmm. Let's see, Michael, do you know there's a guy, I was going to ask you about him. We've never talked about Erasmus. I'm just getting into him. But I got onto him. Do you follow a guy on Twitter? He's got a picture of Erasmus as his thing. Whatever.
I know what you're talking about. What's his name?
Tom. That's his Twitter handle's just Tom.
Okay.
And I almost never leave. I spend maybe 5 minutes a day on Twitter, but he's coming up a lot because I must pause on those. But I almost never leave the comments. But I think the general vibe is we don't know who this person is. I think he lives in Texas. But I think he was somebody who was kind of held captive by maybe some scrupulosity, who was liberated by Erasmus. No. This guy, the Twitter guy. And then it would just be like, I would give credit to Powys and Vizenci or John Sullivan. This guy would give credit to Erasmus. So I started back with his Essential Erasmus. Point being, in the introduction to the version he recommends, and I forget, I probably have it. Anyhow, really good translation, because I think it's a well-born idea that if he wrote in his native language, like was starting to happen around Europe at that time, he'd be as famous. But he wrote in Latin. He was such a scholar. But when you think that he lived through the Protestant Reformation, you get an image that this guy, he saw all this kind of hostile religion over here, and we saw the beginnings of the Counter-Reformation that's over here, and he's never going to be named a saint. But he was looking for an Irenic Catholicism.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Wild. And he really thought, like you're saying, it's all about forgiveness and being kind to our enemies. And this is it's wild stuff, right? We'll have to have this guy on, but what we need, Sophiology is an Irenic Catholicism.
Definitely. Yeah. And actually he influeed I think pretty profoundly, John Donne.
Okay.
John Donne's book Essays in Divinity, which is not a
Yeah.
very long book, but it's
Huh.
about him puzzling through the things that were dividing Christians. And for Donne, it's like, what's the big deal? I don't see where we're divided. I
Yeah.
mean, if it's transubstantiation, some say it's with, some say
Yeah.
nobody
It took
knows.
it took Erasmus to the end of his life. He was world famous at that time. Every university wanted him to condemn Luther, right? And I think he was just really pressured into it. And he was certainly more hospitable with the Catholic faith, but he just didn't think this thing had to get as bad as it did. And
No,
now
it's
we have this stupid battle in the Catholic Church between the liberals and the rad trads, and
well,
it's just so funny.
he described himself as he said, "I laid the egg that Luther hatched."
Yeah, yeah, right, right, right. Um,
Yeah, but I mean, he did have there was part of him that was like Thomas More,
yeah, they were
who,
connected.
who was definitely the Renaissance humanist,
Yeah,
right? But definitely wanted to distance himself and didn't think folk traditions and pilgrimages and relics and stuff were
yeah,
helping Christians at all.
yeah.
And that's some of the stuff I love.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear that. Then we can still say somebody will say, "But I really love it." We're like, "Yeah, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world, but it probably doesn't." Again, it's
That's the
about the
thing.
scale of it.
Well, we live in an age where people think if you like one thing a guy said, you have to be married to him. And
Yeah,
everything
right.
he said. No, no, that's never how it's been.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Rabelais considered Erasmus. He called him his father, mother. He heard that Erasmus needed a certain tome, and Rabelais just to be connected with him. And I think part of the story might be this, and I think if it is, it's super meaningful for me. But Erasmus, translated the New Testament into Greek. I think Rabelais wrote it. And as Powies would say, and my friend Father Ed Dillon, who's kind of a linguist, who's been on the podcast, that Erasmus saw that certain things said in Latin are it's a legal language. It's in the air of Latin. It's top down. And all of a sudden, Rabelais, he reads this thing, the gospel, in Greek. And Rabelais, the whole world is talking about the underworld. It turned upside down. All these things were liberating in the Greek as they were originally written down. And Rabelais took his inspiration, you can make a case, from so much of that. And what came out of it was this, again, Irenic Catholicism, a geniality, where they wage war, and he just makes the enemy, instead of Saddam Hussein, who is in a spider hole or whatever these stories are, he just made him a seller of green sauce for a while. And then he had, like Dante, he had a trip to hell, and he went down there and he goes, they're not such bad people down there, right?
and that's what happened in the Reformation is there were a number of figures like that, like Erasmus, like John Dee. Actually, John Dee. I think John Dee's dabbling with magic to try to talk to angels. In my estimation, was actually a project to recapture the language of Adam so that the divisions in Christendom could be healed.
Wow.
That's what his deal was.
Yeah.
Um, but they were in the minority,
Yeah.
and of course, the political environment encouraged division. It's kind of like now, right? It's kind of like
Right. No,
division.
that's what I'm saying.
It's like algorithms. That was the early modern version of algorithms. How to
Yeah.
divide people.
Yeah. It was. And again, we're just being so swept up in those same patterns right now with our overly politicized branches of religion, so that it's Elvis Costello again. What's so funny about peace, love, and understanding becomes a legitimate question.
It is a legit question,
Yeah, yeah,
and
we
people.
need to ask it.
It seems a lot of people prefer war and misunderstanding.
I think it's the understatement of your career, but like your understatement captures the absurdity that so many people, I think, do. That their religion is tied up within. We got to let people know it's a dog eat dog world out
Well,
there.
yeah,
So you and I got God in our back pocket. This is the one true faith. And he's on our side, and it's some twisted version of Twain's war prayer and everything.
well, yeah, and I think you see it in our cultural situation right now. You see the kinds of Irenicist figures who don't agree on everything,
Mm-hmm.
but they're people you can call from the left and the right who uh, can come together. In fact, I was just watching a slip cut from an interview of Jimmy Dore, if you know
Mm-hmm.
him.
Yeah, I do.
was a lefty. I mean, he was a traditional lefty. He was interviewing Tucker Carlson.
Of course, yeah.
They had a lot to agree on.
Of course,
And
yeah, yeah.
similarly with you see Naomi Wolf and other kinds of people who are like got some heavy lefty pedigrees, but now it's not that they're moving to the right, but they even Bill Maher, right,
Yeah,
who realize now polarization is stupid. I mean, it's not that I hate everything. I don't have to love everything you believe in,
yeah,
but
right.
well, we can have a conversation. That's what academia is based on, and academia actually, unfortunately, is not that at all anymore.
Right.
In the main,
Hmm.
it's as tribal and as fractured as anything you see in social media.
Yeah. No, just even thinking about it, you could cry about it because it didn't have to be this way.
No, and it didn't
Where,
used
yeah,
to either.
yeah.
I mean, because I don't know if you remember when I was a kid, I didn't know what my parents' political affiliation was.
I didn't either.
Nobody cared.
No, no,
It was such a minor thing in people's lives.
yeah. I guess
Nobody,
I honestly think I hadn't thought of that. Like nobody is true. Nobody cared.
nobody knew.
Nobody would have wondered if what the neighbors thought about this president or that president. They would have been at their backyard barbecue. Yeah, it just
Nobody
wasn't a
cared.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
I didn't know. I mean, I think it was 10 or 11. I figured out my parents must have been Democrats, but they were not, you know, CNN watching Democrats. They were working class Detroit people,
I think my dad,
working class
yeah,
Catholic.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That the Democratic Party had something going for it there, you know. But I think I'm laughing too because I don't know what my parents were. So if my mom might have been Democrat, and my dad, if he was Republican, and I think he was, I remember his bumper sticker said during the Bush era, "I'm already against the next war," and I knew he just thought like Bush was the worst president,
Yeah,
which was true. Yeah. So if he was a Republican, he wasn't caught up in the tribalism and was willing to drop it at a moment's notice. Um, it's interesting. Where did I see an interesting take on who somebody we liked came out with something for Robert Kennedy Jr. that was very thoughtful. Oh, it was our friend Adam Smith.
oh, did
I
he?
mentioned, yeah, yeah, yeah. You'd like it. He's been on the podcast twice, and over at Front Porch Republic, he was doing some really interesting things, and it made me think. I left a comment on his article, but he's looking at politics, and it's this notion between is it tragedy or comedy? We just don't know. Like when you're living through this nightmare, what do you do? And I was telling him, and that's to tie a lot of this around. That's why I was with that Gerald Hurd book because I was letting Adam know that in Gerald Hurd, when he looks at the end of the at the end of the Hindu development, they had
Mhm.
uh, the Vedas, the Upanishads. Then there was looking the Gita, I believe, was seen as the fifth Veda, like some people talk about the fifth gospel. And then it was moving towards Tantra, which is not what people think it was. But it's almost, I've said this once in the podcast, that tragedy is an aperture that's smaller and you widen it and you can see comedy. We might see part of the story, a guy's getting chased by something and a shadow looks like a knife, but widen the aperture and there's a comedy. And Tantra was moving in this direction. And then the Islamic invasion happened and it was strangled in the cradle. And I find that so fascinating. That's where I saw Hurd reflect on this kind
Yeah,
of Cartesian way of thinking.
that's how I think about the Reformation. Because,
Uh-huh.
as I mentioned this week, I dipped into some Renaissance Neoplatonism,
I think I saw
and
you
it's
had
still
pictures of.
idealistic and optimistic. Ficino and Pico, about what the world can be like, and they were all tapped into the. I was even reading the Hermetica this week
Uh-huh.
because they were all tapped into that stuff, and it's all really super beautiful and idealistic and hopeful. And it was like almost like you had like the West was at this moment about to really flower, and
Mhm.
then the Reformation starts and all hell breaks
Yeah,
loose. And
yeah,
then
yeah.
and the reaction with that, and I think we're probably seeing something like that now. What happens when you have this flowering period, like was in the Florentine Renaissance, of intellectual and artistic growth and renewal, and the sky was the limit. But then the Reformation comes in, and then all of a sudden everybody's got to get serious. You have to tighten up ship, right? Which is what the Counter
Exactly.
Reformation is. Where the Counter Reformation is like, you call that a Reformation? I'm going to show you a Reformation, and
Yeah.
everybody gets super strict. And
Yeah.
actually, one of the books I've been reading this week is Juan Culiano's Eros and Renaissance Magic, or whatever it's
Yeah.
called.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's his argument, right? Is that it was basically the Reformation shows up, and then the Counter Reformation is like it's like playing poker with her. Oh, you think that was we're going
Yeah.
to see a Reformation, and we're going to raise you.
And Erasmus was that guy who just wanted that whole this kind of peace-loving, gospel-infiltrated life. You're right. And he might have been the flower when you say it was flowering about to happen. His breath, his humanity to read his writing. He was a human being, a giant, right? And then the whole thing happened. And do you think, listeners of the show, Germany prior to World War I was catching on some of that vibe?
Exactly.
Do you agree or no?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you go
Things are
from
coming together in wild combinations there.
Catholicism to German idealism,
Yeah.
and how did those guys end up in the Nazis, right?
Yeah. Right.
I mean, it was, but again, I think those are external
Guido's book. Yeah.
economic and political forces, which
Shout out Guido. Shout out.
which put pressure on
Yeah.
the whole culture to get it together, right?
Yeah.
And so everybody, and there's a great moment in that movie, which we talked about on this podcast too, Wings of Desire, where this old German dude, Homer, he's called in the movie, is lamenting what happened, and the way he describes it, and then all of a sudden people weren't friendly anymore.
Wow. Friends.
Right?
Yep.
It's in a way, it's the story of the human race. We get almost to the point of something beautiful, and then all of a sudden people weren't friendly anymore.
Yeah. You saw, I think it was it was in Jesus the Imagination. And my son thought he was discovering at the same time. But I contrast interest with interest to come at something you're getting at, right? Interest in terms of usury versus this most beautiful word of interbeing, friendship, putting yourself into another person's place, sharing their being with them, friendship, not being alone. And then you have interest, something dead, compound. It grows faster than cancer. And, my favorite quote, and I used it in that article, Thomas Mann, the novelist, in Dr. Faustus, somebody said, what's the greatest emotion? Everybody agreed in the room, or however the scene was, is love. And he goes, no. It's interest. And he said, you can love this or that, which captures on Dostoevsky's love for humanity and hatred of individuals and so forth. But to be interested in somebody else, it's gone, like friendship.
Right.
When the world used to be friendly. Yeah.
And it goes right to Simone Weil, right?
Yeah.
But attention is the purest and rarest form of generosity.
Yeah. Yeah. This Howard Thurman, an African-American theologian, I worked at a research project based on him for a number of years. The background theme of so much of his preaching, which was great, was a friendly world under friendly skies. And all, it's just kind of like what Elvis Costello was saying about peace, love, and understanding. We just laugh at those things now, right? What's so funny about them? So a friendly world under friendly skies. We'd say, you'd just be cast by the cynical jet set. Nobody talks like that anymore. Yeah.
Somebody's got to start, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me, my friend, what are you doing for Christmas? What's going on the farm? What's new? You got a book of poetry at the press.
What is going? I don't know. It's we keep it kind of low key. The day after Christmas dinner is the day all the relatives and everybody comes over. So Christmas Day, I think we're gonna eat some goose.
Okay.
Just chill out. And I'm hoping to get out and do a little bit more hunting, beer hunting. Mm-hmm. But how about you?
I'm trying to think. Christmas somewhat subdued. We're going to the Big Apple tomorrow to see a niece in her dance school's Nutcracker, which will be nice. And I have a daughter and her husband, or son-in-law, who lives there in Queens, and it's they live in a cool part of Queens. I can't deny, like, the trip into the city and out is kind of a pain in the ass. I might take the subway to Rockefeller Center. It's about a 7-minute ride. Maybe it's 20. And everything's safe and it's pretty. And so I like it probably more than I let on, but I don't love it. And I still wonder, like, who can raise kids here?
Yeah, I
So,
know.
but we've done over the years because we go down there a lot. We've seen the Rockettes, and it's not that I'm allergic to the magic of it. I know my daughter, my other daughter, we're bringing with us, and her husband. She loves that Rockefeller tree and everything, and she wouldn't miss it. So we're doing
How long
that
a drive is that for you?
about 5 hours, not too bad.
Okay.
Yep. And then Christmas Day, we got my son and his wife Abby coming from Columbus, and my youngest son Aiden. He's still here, and should be nice. We have in-laws around here and everything. Yeah,
Sounds good.
should be good. And so next year, what we know, we're for our listeners, you're gonna start hearing some of the our pals Guido and Tara. I want to have Lindsay Rose on again soon. I hope she
Yeah,
hears this. Oh, we got to have Therese on, and then we'll be weaving in our cadre. Like, what subjects, Michael, we'll kind of conclude on this topic. What subjects have you been thinking about lately that we have to weave in?
What have I been thinking about? I haven't been thinking about too much.
Yeah, you've
I've
been busy, so
been so busy. But
I wanted
we're
to.
trying to,
Yeah,
well, I'm going to get Roger Buck on the show.
yeah, he'd be great.
I just dropped him an email today. Hopefully he'll come in.
Yeah,
But
I'd like to do a show on Johnny Appleseed. Yep. One on Erasmus. I'd like to do one. I'd like to see that Stephen Clark again. I think he speaks from a unique place, and when I'm listening, I find things he says magnetized. Guido will be joining us again, of course. Adam, many others. Who else? Who else have we talked we want to see on this? Oh, if anybody knows how to connect with this guy who wrote Blake in the Last Hemisphere, any of our listeners, I'll send you some regeneration merch. Oh, we could sell merch next year. My daughter is just flipping out t-shirts at the drop of a hat.
Is she really?
So in the New Year's, well, I'll try to promote something in the next couple of weeks. People could get a regeneration t-shirt. And then I think that's about it.
We should get Matthew Milliner back on too.
Yeah, exactly. I'm right now. He came up again. I read his G.K. Chesterton and the Native Americans.
Yeah.
And I just follow like talks he gives around the country. The guy's endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, he is, and he's entertaining too.
He's funny as hell.
I mean,
Yeah.
he must be a great
My
teacher.
daughter would say, get him back on. Some friends I know could say, get Therese back on. Get Therese back on. I've heard the Lindsay Rose here. There's a guy commenting lately today. You see comments. John Swanson might be his name. Sounds like a really intelligent guy, John, when you listen to this. And right now, it seems like he's obsessed with Guido Preparati. You'll have to look at some of those comments, Michael. Yeah, very informed opinion. At times, mad that Guido couldn't appreciate the Beatles when he could spend his time listening to Vivaldi his whole life. And
I still haven't gotten that book. I got to get that book.
Which book?
Empire and Church.
He's going to send it to us. And if Guido, if you're listening, remember you said you're going to send us your books. He's got about 4 out right now. He's got one on Afghanistan
Hopefully
and 9/11.
I hope he got his copy of Jesus' Imagination. I sent it about a month ago.
I hope our listeners buy Jesus the Imagination, read Guido Preparati's retelling of a Grimm's fairy tale that will blow your mind.
There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah. And actually, we'll have another conversation next week. I'll start sending out these emails, gathering our friends. We'll either find time or not, but people will be seeing us pretty regularly. All right.
And I look forward to seeing you all again.
All right. Peace out, Cub Scout. Thanks for listening.